somewhere. Corfu, let's say. Through the 400 years of the Islamic occupation, the Turks, you had one generation after another of Christian mothers and fathers who didn't take the occupation seriously, who never bothered to tell their children, look, there is a difference. There is a difference between what the Khalifa is saying and what we believe. There is a difference between the Muslim call to prayer on the minaret that's been built on top of our own church that used to be an Orthodox place of worship and what used to be taught there. There is a difference between the God of Abraham and Isaac and his son Jesus Christ and the Holy Spirit. There is a difference between that and Allah and how he is served. There is a difference in what we worship. There is a difference in Greek nationhood and what that stood for and what the oppression of Islam and the Turks stood for. And you better believe that one parent after another taught that lesson somehow. We have the proof. You're sitting here. If you weren't here, that would be the proof that someone hadn't passed on the torch. In the same way that when those icons were dug up in the Soviet Union, you may never meet her, but that's proof that some lady, some man, some priest, some holy mother, some nun sacrificed, took a chance, disobeyed the law, followed their Orthodox obligation before they followed their getting on with the state obligation, and passed something on. And the fact of the matter is, if we don't know what we believe and don't pass it on, we are going to be the equivalent of some generation of Turks on Crete, of Greeks on Crete or Corfu who said, look, our parents used to have these differences with the Turks, but really we're all just the same. We're all here to just get along. This is really the same thing. They worship the same God we do. They have a slightly different point of view, that's all. And we'll learn to get on and we can all prosper here. Had that happened, there would be no Orthodox Church today, at least that came out of the Greek heritage. Had that happened in the Soviet Union, had every bishop compromised with the KGB, there would be no Orthodox Church there today. So what is the call here? The call is first, I believe, to try to get our lives in order vis-a-vis discipline in the church, and that to me begins with confession, a very simple and terrifically complex thing at the same time. Because confession, you see, leads to the life of prayer, because it makes you mindful of it, and it leads to the life of taking the sacraments, because it guides you towards them, and it leads to the life of accountability. It's like one of those doors that is narrow, but when you go through, a whole world opens up to you. That Greek parents must have passed the torch on to their children under the domination of Islam. And that is, no, we are not the same. These people, our conquerors, may be created in the image of God, and if you have business dealing with them, you don't cheat them. They're not slaves, they're not garbage, they're human beings. But nevertheless, what they believe is different than what we believe. Moreover, they are wrong, and we are right. And that is the opposite of the American pluralistic system, which says everybody's right, there is no truth, and it doesn't matter what you do as long as it makes you feel good. The fact of the matter is, our job as Orthodox Christians is to first be Orthodox first, and American and Greek and ethnic second. I think the second job is to see ourselves as distinct from this culture. Because believe me, I cannot imagine how the church can survive in a culture this prostituted if it sees itself as the same as that culture. It is one thing to have a mission to a whorehouse. It is another to be living there as one of the whores and think that that is the same as having a mission. The fact of the matter is, I think we've confused the two sometimes. And the Orthodox Church has to see itself diametrically as separate from, different from, and opposed to the modern ethic in modern, materialistic, godless, humanistic America. And unless we start seeing that, we are not going to pass our test. And unlike the church in the Soviet Union that came out of the rubble, because believe me, this culture too is headed for rubble, we will not be there. We will simply be, en masse, the compromised KGB bishop or the traitor to the Turk. That will be the equivalent. There's an interesting historic lesson, and whether the analogy is direct or not, it's a good illustration, so I'll use it with the understanding that I'm not saying that it's 100% accurate, but it's a good illustration. When the Turks were actually at the gates of Constantinople, you remember, the Byzantine Christians of the Orthodox Church at that time were given a strange choice. Although nobody said this is your choice, everyone understood that it was. They could have union with the Western corrupt Roman Catholic papacy by following the Union of Florence in the 15th century, and for having that union, they would be given the military protection and might of Northern Europe, or they could remain Orthodox, true to their Byzantine inheritance, and then the West would wash its hands of them and let the Turks come on. That was the choice, and a lot of Orthodox and Byzantine understood it as such. And the fact of the matter is, if you look at the history of the fall of Byzantium, the last stand on the walls and gates of Constantinople, what you see is that the people, even though they had been abandoned in that generation and in a way betrayed by some of their hierarchs, stood firm. And they were the ones who refused the false union with the corrupt Western Church and papacy, rather than take the easy way out and make a union with the West and perhaps have Byzantium defended for a few more generations against the Turk. And so what you see is that they went down, swords drawn, the altar clean, the chalice undefiled. And the fact of the matter is, Byzantium fell, but that is the inheritance that lives in the Orthodox Church. It's the inheritance of the KGB widow, if you like, made such because she hid the icon and she lost her family as a result, but nevertheless has passed the church and the truth on. It is the inheritance of every Greek grandmother and mother that in the light of Islamic persecution whispered a prayer, taught somebody a snatch of the liturgy, hid an ice icon down by the olive oil press in the basement. It is the inheritance of the American Orthodox Church to the extent that our forefathers may have come here as immigrants, but this is what they built. And so once they were here, they were more true to their inheritance than they were to the American way of life. Because what's in here was built with blood, sweat, and toil by people who couldn't afford it. And they built it because they may not have understood how they were drawn to the American continent. But when they got here, it wasn't just business as usual. This is the inheritance of Orthodoxy. It stands here all around us. It was not built by people who just said, well, we'll get on with this Protestant culture. We'll let somebody else baptize our child. We'll let somebody else do it. It's all one and the same. Our Orthodox forefathers in America may have simply come here as part of the American experiment, but once they got here, they did the right thing. This is the evidence of it. The reason there's a church here is because they realized that Orthodoxy was distinct from the Protestantized Western culture around it, and they voted with their feet and their pocketbooks, and they built this, and they paid for these icons, and that's where we're sitting today, and that's why we have Orthodoxy here in America, because having come here, they may have just jumped ship as a house painter, but once they got here, their better nature, their Byzantine inheritance came out, and they became missionaries involuntarily, and they built, and they passed on. But the one thing they didn't count on, as far as I can tell, is the insidiousness of the American culture around that. They believed Protestantized Americans when they said, you're coming to a country where everybody's free to worship. What they didn't say is they didn't finish the sentence. And that is, everybody's free to worship technically, but increasingly, especially in the 20th century, the whole culture will set its hand against everything you believe, from your popular entertainment to your editorial news page to what your third grade teacher's teaching your daughter or your son. And that's the area that we have been unprepared. And that's why we are losing a whole generation of Orthodox Christians. And that's why I wandered around for 10 years and did not meet Orthodox who could explain their faith to me in the same way that every Mormon on every street corner or Hare Krishna can tell you what they believe, however wrong that is. But the fact of the matter is, walking by the light they've been given, they at least let you know they're there. Now for me, therefore, the answer is not a program. It is the enlightenment of our own Orthodox mind within the Orthodox tradition. It is not something new, it is the opposite. It is to find those things that are ancient and true that never change, such as confession, such as a sacramentally based life. And that is the witness that hopefully we will give not only to future generations, but to those seeking. And I'd like to conclude these remarks by just saying this. I do not believe that Orthodoxy needs a, quote, evangelistic program in the sense it's normally meant, because I believe that just as a light will attract moths, so an Orthodox church and Orthodox people who are truly like Christ will in fact do what Seraphim of Sarov said Christians will do, and that is that just being with them is like being in the presence of the light of Christ, and we will be a witness. And believe me, the young people who are packing the churches in the Soviet Union, where there are 10,000 baptisms on a weekend, the mothers who are coming for christenings, the fact that there are not even a fraction of enough priests to do the work, that their great problem is how do they train the thousands of young priests and women who want to become nuns. There are more than 250 convents and almost 3 or 4, I think it's 400 now, new monasteries or reopened monasteries. Why do you think they're coming into the Orthodox Church? Because of some slick, well-financed program? Of course not. They have no money. It is because the light is there. And one story that I think applies to our American situation in a way is this. I have a friend who's been spending a lot of time in Russia doing some things helping the church there. And one story I heard of was that in a church near Kiev, the KGB had blown the church up in the sense they had put explosives in it and blown the roof off. So you had a 5 or 6 story structure like this, even bigger, standing but empty to the sky. But because the walls were very thick, of course, it didn't fall down. It had been well built. So the KGB built a ramp up, and they forced the town to use that church as their garbage disposal. They made it a law in the city there, in this community, that they had to dump their garbage there. And so, for more than 40 years, it was the garbage dump. Everything was in there. Comes a day, a few years before Gorbachev was toppled, when there was more freedom, that, with a laugh on his lips, the local KGB commander handed the deed of the church back to some old priest. He says, here, you can have your church back now. Big joke. It's the city dump, infested with rats, up to the ceiling with garbage. So, the word came out into the community that this had happened. And, of course, they had no budget and no money. And the priest asked the local communist party leader if there would be some help in some machinery or earth moving or a conveyor belt or something to help them clean this place up. And he said, of course not. So they told the people, and of course no more Orthodox are meant to exist in this community. They've had 70 years of secularist indoctrination. So what happened is on the first Sunday, after this announcement came, nobody knows how, after just a few days, the priest came out of this house he had been living in and walked down the street, and the church was surrounded by thousands of villagers, people from the area. With their bare hands, they opened the door that had been bricked, and they formed a line from the church more than 3 kilometers to the garbage dump that was now being used because the church had filled up a few years before. With their bare hands, with not even a shovel and no equipment, they cleaned their church. For a month, they worked. And they passed one hand to the next, the refuse of 40 years, until their church was cleaned. And when it was empty, local builders from the area, who should not exist because they were not supposed to know anything about Orthodoxy, came into the church, and in these bare walls, still stinking of garbage, they asked the priest to perform a liturgy. And the priest said they could not perform a liturgy because there were no icons. There was a lady in the crowd, they said she was about 80 years old, and she said, wait a moment, Father. She went away from the place. She asked some young men to come with her. They went into her back garden, and they dug up the icons from the church. Because when she had been 10 years old, with her grandmother, the KGB, while they were actually placing the explosives in the building, did not know it, but one old lady and one 10-year-old little girl were taking the icons and putting them in an ox cart behind the church. At risk of their lives, they would have been shot. They drove back to her farm, and she buried them in the potato cellar for all those years, almost 50, 60 years. Not one of them was rotten. They brought them back, the crowd parted, and a processions of icons came up, and they placed them, and in the middle of this rat-infested building, they held their first liturgy. After 2 years of work, they managed to get a roof on the building, but they said, now we don't have any money to finish the building and to replaster it. What should we do? No one in the community had any money. Gorbachev had just fallen. The Soviet Union is bankrupt, of course. There is no money. What could they do? The priest said, well, it will take many years, but thank God we have our church back. The next Sunday, a small delegation of villagers came with a pillowcase. And in the pillowcase was every wedding ring from every villager in the town. And it paid for the refurbishing of the whole church. That's a true story. Now, that's a story that should not be able to happen. There you see the might of the whole Soviet Union crumble in the face of a 10-year-old girl and one woman of faith. There you see the church coming out of the rubble in all its glory. Now, the fact of the matter is, we're in the same situation. Our culture is a garbage dump. We are throwing our babies away. We are giving out condoms before we teach people to read. We have created a rat-infested city refuse compost heap out of this nation. In this country, the church is going to have to perform the miracle in reverse. And that is, there's not garbage in the church yet. But if the Church of Jesus Christ in this country has the light that the little girl and the grandmother in Kiev had through a spiritual walk, here is the Orthodox program. Have that light in the church and simply open those doors, and I believe the rest will happen. Thank you, and God bless you. Now we'll have some questions. Yes. Good point. Okay. Two good questions. I'll take one first. I'll repeat it in case you couldn't hear. Pardon? I'm going to repeat the question. Don't be fine. The first question was in regard to abortion. We hear about abortion vis-a-vis women don't have abortions and so forth. What about talking to men about their responsibilities in chastity? The second was the issue of people claiming they're non-denominational. Two different questions. I'll take the first. In a book I'm writing now called Dancing Alone, I have a whole chapter on the historic church and abortion, because I've been amazed to find that right back to the very beginning, to the Didache and St. Basil and the others, the church has always taken a strong stand, as it did on child sacrifice and the slaughter of all innocent people. And this has been an issue that I've also approached as someone in the pro-life community and who's worked in these areas of crisis pregnancy centers and so forth. And here's one thing, unrelated to the church, but related very much to our moment of history, that I believe and that I've written quite forcefully in this book and say wherever I talk about the issue. So had I been giving a speech on this, that's what I already would have said. In 1973, when Roe v. Wade was handed down, there was a curious fiction that developed, and that was that abortion somehow was liberating to women and part of the feminist movement. But as someone who has been involved with this issue a long time and has done a lot of reading on the literature of who supports who, I can tell you this, and that is that I do believe abortion liberated some people. And I think it was a great liberation. But it wasn't women. It was sexually irresponsible American males that got liberated, because the woman is still stuck. The fact of the matter is that it is no coincidence that the first people to support legalized abortion in America outside of Planned Parenthood was Playboy and Penthouse magazine, and that the Playboy Foundation put hundreds of thousands of dollars into the original fight to make abortion legal, and they funded many of Planned Parenthood's full-page ads. Why? Because the mentality that will legalize abortion and strip women of the special protection of society and the state is also the society that will tolerate women being treated like slabs of meat in a pornographic magazine. And the fact of the matter is, if we look at this society's attitude towards human life, as expressed, let's say, through Roe v. Wade, what you see is that the sexually irresponsible American male who believes that he has been put here, his purpose is to enjoy himself and self-realization rather than responsibility, whether it's in making child support payments or getting people pregnant, has been liberated by Roe v. Wade, because what Roe v. Wade has done has essentially reduced what almost every civil culture in the world understood was a perennial responsibility. And this includes non-Christian cultures. And that is that since women bear a special responsibility in terms of sexual activity because of pregnancy, the culture itself, whether in its laws against rape, whether it was in the protection of virginity of your daughter, in every ancient culture in the world, all these things bore testimony to the fact that any kind of a civil society was only civil to the degree that it protected women from sexual abuse. And to the extent that abortion has liberated people in America, it has not liberated the many women that I've talked to when I've gone around speaking at crisis pregnancy centers. It's liberated the men in our sexually permissive society that treat sex like a contact sport. That's who's been liberated. And the fact of the matter is, one of the great ironies of our moment of history is that you have certain elements, not all, because there are many, many people who have written from the feminist side who would agree with what I've just said at that point. But you have had some of the more vocal elements of the feminist movement so co-opted by this attitude of this free-for-all in terms of personal moral responsibility, that they have actually signed on to legalized abortion as if somehow that is part of a feminist movement, whereas actually what it is it's part of the movement in this country to duck responsibility across the board, particularly male responsibility. And therefore, when you see that the pornography industry from the very beginning has supported legalized abortion, they understood very well exactly which side their bread was buttered on. And it is only the naivety of our culture that is swayed by words like choice because they conjure up other images. Of course, that's a ridiculous description of abortion because there's no choice involved whatsoever for the aborted child. That child's stripped of all future choices. But nevertheless, we're so swayed by these things because we have no moral rudder, no moral compass, that we have bought into this idea. So I think you're quite right. And I think one of the things that needs to be said in this area is that the legalization of abortion has actually had exactly the opposite effect. And there's no doubt in my mind, none at all, I cannot cite a study that would prove this, but there's no doubt in my mind that the general callousness of our culture towards motherhood and childbearing, because of abortion, because of divorce, because of all the many things we've done to demote it, is the same callousness that has produced an explosion in rape, including and especially date rape on college campuses, where supposedly Ivy League students are treating women like chattel property. And the fact of the matter is, when you start denigrating the rights of a human being in any area, whether it's the slave trade or anything else, you are going to introduce terrible habits of mind into your culture. And just as our culture has not treated black people well because of the slave trade, and this has infested our vision of other people and the way we've treated people often, similarly, an abortion culture that will get rid of people because they're inconvenient and reduce sex to a contact sport is asking for a dehumanization in every area of life. And so, the other week I was reading a newspaper, and it was almost like seeing a parable come to life. I forget where I was. Somewhere in the Midwest, Bloomington, Indiana, I think, and there was a parallel headline. Bill Clinton signs fetal experimentation executive order on one side, and on the other side it was 12-year-old arrested for plotting to kill teacher. And the funny thing is, you could take that paper and you could frame it and you could say, here's a snapshot of our culture today. But this, not directly, but indirectly, has a lot to do with this. In our culture, life is cheap. And we're making it cheaper by the minute. It's just expedient. I read the interview with the 12-year-old, why she and her 13-year-old friend brought butcher knives to school to kill their teacher in class, and they were only caught 30 seconds before they did it. The reason why is because the teacher had given them a bad grade, and they thought they were owed a good grade. She had gotten in their way. And in their ignorant academic pursuit of acquisitive get-aheadness, this little twisted American dream just turned on its head. All you need to do is stir in the abortion mentality. Why not kill your teacher? That same teacher's life when she's 70 or 80 years old and incontinent and going senile probably isn't going to be worth that in this culture, because the elderly are next. You better believe it. They're expensive to keep around. And if we'll pull the plug on babies, we're going to do it to the old people. So the fact of the matter is, I saw a very strange symmetry there that illustrates the point. Looking at the other question about this denominational business where they say they're, what was the word you used? Non-denominational. Of course, that's nonsense in the same way that Protestants will sometimes tell you that they don't have any traditions they follow. And that only the Orthodox have traditions and they just have the Bible. Well, try talking a Southern Baptist into abandoning his or her tradition to baptize an infant. Try talking a Calvinist Reformed person into abandoning their tradition and saying that they believe in free will. Try talking a Presbyterian into having any kind of a worship service that doesn't include a sermon. Try talking a charismatic Christian into abandoning their tradition of tongues and prophecy. The fact of the matter is, it isn't a choice between no traditions and freedom in Protestantism and Orthodox tradition. It's a choice between the historic traditions of the Church that you'll find in Eusebius and Carthage and Constantinople and buried in the Phanar in the record of the bones going all the way back to the beginning of the patriarchs, to the throne of Andrew, and man-made traditions from the 19th century, the 18th century, the 15th century, and the 16th century, and the 20th century. So when a Protestant talks to you about being non-denominational or not having a tradition or just basing what they say upon the Bible, That's a good game, but the problem is it's not true, A. And B, of course, even if it's true for the moment, like they've just invented their church 2 minutes ago, it won't be true tomorrow, because the fact of the matter is nobody has the Bible alone, because the person who is reading it interprets it, and that is a tradition, even if it's just their own self-made interpretation. There wouldn't be 23,000 denominations if there weren't 23,000 interpretations of Scripture. And the fact of the matter is that when Protestants say they're going to the Bible only and not interpreting it, that, of course, is nonsense, because then they're setting themselves up as their own tradition. The Orthodox mind, however, comes to the Scripture in a different way, and that is it comes in the humility of understanding that the collective wisdom, the received wisdom of 2,000 years of church history, and the apostolic witness of the church fathers, those who were closest to the source, who, as Eusebius said, had the words of the apostles ringing in their ears, must be listened to, because it is only in that light that what the Bible means, rather than just what it says, can be understood. And that, of course, is what we call the holy tradition. And so, I think when you look at this question, you first have to ask some questions back, in view of, not this idea of there not being traditions and so forth. Yeah. Mm-hmm. 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 What do you say about this? Well, first of all, this gets into an area which I'm not qualified to speak, so I can't say much, because who am I to judge the hierarchy of the church? I wouldn't be Orthodox if I was going to set myself up to say anything about like that. Protestants are always judging their pastors and priests, but that's not the Orthodox way. I would say, however, when it comes to the monastic tradition, that there seems to be a growing recognition within Orthodoxy in America, people I talk to from many different jurisdictional backgrounds, that part of the damage that has been done by coming in the ethnic manner we talked about is the fact that since we didn't come as missionaries, we've reversed the process. Usually the monks are the first people to get there, or the missionary is, and then they come in that form, like St. Herman of Alaska. And this process obviously has to be changed. And there are many people who seem to see that that is so, both priests and some bishops I've talked to, and certainly many lay people. So there is going to have to be a move in that direction. But again, I don't think it's going to be one of these Protestantized, organized things where 20 people get this together and decide there's got to be monasteries, so you form the American Orthodox Council for Monastic Revolution, whatever. It has to come naturally. And it has to come first with the hearts of the people who would be monks and nuns. I met a black woman called Mother Martha, who's a nun in a small monastery outside of San Antonio the other day. And obviously a very holy woman, and I mean obviously. I couldn't imagine a Christian looking in her eyes and not seeing what you had immediately. And in asking her for her blessing and in listening to her wisdom and what she had to say, in the same way that I realized that there's a hunger there for true confession to your spiritual father, it illustrated your point exactly, because I was thinking to myself, there ought to be a Mother Martha in every community of America. We need people like her and like the monks I met there, so that there is spiritual refreshment where you can come in out of this howling secular wasteland and have that. And so hopefully, as the Orthodox Church is called forward by the Holy Spirit in this country, there will be people who will step forward to do that. But that can't, again, be an organizational thing, because you can't fake it. If you read the lives of the fathers and the mothers of the church, what do you see? You don't see somebody forming a committee and saying, St. Mary of Egypt did not say, or Mother Martha, this black woman from Detroit, fabulous, wonderful person. Mother Martha did not wake up one morning and say, I have something to say, I got to get out there and take my part. It's the opposite of emancipation. It's giving everything you have to the church and being willing to be invisible, which I'm not willing to do because I'm not a holy person. And go sit nowhere for a while like Seraphim of Sarov, 28 years in the forest, and be willing to reemerge for 3 years in your cell and share what you've learned. That's not the American way. We want a program and a committee. We want to be out there. We claim our rights. We're going to do it all in front of the world. Boom, boom, boom. Aggressive, fist-in-your-face stuff, which is what I suffer from. Because, I'm calling the pot black here myself. I come out of the movie business and all the rest of it. This is not known as a gentle school for humility. So my idea is always to reach for the nearest, weapon and shoot first and ask questions later. So as I look around the country, Though, to me, it's not the organization, it's more the lesson of the church there near Kiev. It's when people turn up and just do it, because God's leading them. But the way you produce monks and nuns is by producing generations of Christians who understand what it means to answer to a spiritual father and not their own egos. And when you've been going to confession for years, and when you answer to that person, and when you are humble, when you learn the lesson of Maximus, who said that it's better to obey your Holy Father even when they're wrong, because the spiritual humility it teaches you when you're treated badly is the best thing for you. Now that's the opposite of all American liberation philosophies. Male, female, neuter, I don't care. When you have that mentality, then we're going to produce the Holy Mothers and Holy Fathers that are going to be the light. But it can't be fabricated. It can't be taught. It's got to be done from the heart. And when that starts happening, again, just open the doors and people will come. You could take somebody like a Mother Martha, I'm convinced, and you could lock her in a room somewhere in a trailer park. And for some unknown reason, a line would begin to form. Because people would come to her and bless me. And she would. That's what you want. And you want the Holy Fathers, and you want the Holy Mothers. The Church has always had them. It's the big missing element in American Orthodoxy. But it isn't by design. It isn't because our patriarch or our hierarchs have done a bad job. It is because the people they have had to lead have often been hard-hearted. And so parish council congregational orthodoxy is not orthodoxy. And it is not the fault of the hierarchy. It's a stiff-necked Americanism that we're going to do it our way. We're going to have everything our way. Who's this guy? He's just our priest. Who are you? I was talking to one bishop the other day. Well, it was our bishop, as a matter of fact, in Boston. And His Grace was telling me, we were discussing just something about the American church, and he was saying a parish council president came to him the other day, and there was something in the church, and the parish council president actually said this to him. Who are you to tell me what we should do with the church? And His Grace he said, I was very surprised. I said to him, I'm your bishop. You've come to me about a matter of Orthodox church business. I'm not telling you how to run your pharmaceutical company. I'm not telling you what to do. You've asked me what to do in this church situation. I'm your bishop. The very fact you're sitting here means that you should be listening to what I'm saying. If you're not listening to what I'm saying, what are you doing here? Is this a tea party? No. You come as to your bishop. See, that's the American mentality. It doesn't understand that. But you know what? Why should that surprise us? This is what kids tell their parents. Hey, who are you to tell me? That's what MTV is telling them to tell their parents. That's what their high school teacher's telling them to tell their parents. Who's that old bag telling you, here, take a condom, take 6, take the peppermint-flavored ones. You may not know how to read, but we'll teach you how to use this. Who's that guy telling you? A priest? What's that? So why should we be surprised? We live in the culture whose first words are always, who are you to tell us anything? Our children's, everybody. That's how we treat everyone. Why do you think we have such abounding mediocrity in government today? Who could possibly put up with trying to lead this stiff-necked people? Of course, we're just going to get political lickspittles up there. Who else would run for office in a country that is going to go through your so-called ethics with a fine-tooth comb and at the end of the day say, who are you to say anything anyway? Even if you spent your life in public service. This is what America's all about. And, of course, it's disintegrating around us. Walk out in the street here and look at the graffiti. You think this is civilization? And that's the problem. Who are you to say anything? That's the American disease. We say to our parents and so forth. So you talk about our bishops and our priests. I have every sympathy. Because when I'm a movie director making a movie, okay, I've noticed something. It's really interesting. It's impossible to direct these brat pack actors. I just did a movie with Judge Reinhold and Carol Kane. And Carol's all right. I won't say anything about anyone else. But what amazes me is I remember doing a play some time back with Mason. What's his first name? The British actor. James Mason, before he died, when I was living in Switzerland. We were working on a thing together. Here I was, a kid. I was 19, 20 years old. Nothing. But I was the director. James Mason was at the height of his career. He could have done anything or told me anything. Who was I? Okay? And yet it was so interesting. He had been raised in a generation of professional actors in which the word director meant something, even if it came attached to a goof like me. And so he treated me like a director. I'll work with some kid who's 19 now out in Hollywood who's never done a thing in his life. He made a commercial somewhere. And I've made 30 hours of documentaries all over the world, and I've done 4 features and written books, blah, 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 taught acting. I should know something. This kid has been raised in schools that just tell them to say, who are you to tell me anything? It's impossible to make a movie under these conditions. because you cannot have everybody being the director. And so I feel terribly, not sorry for, because I think it's the calling, but I feel great empathy with the Orthodox hierarchy in America, because they're in America. And this country may have certain things it does well, but respect is not one of them. And so, but again, I don't think that the answer to that is to come up with a program for a clergy laity thing on reintroduction of respect into the Orthodox Church. That's failed the minute it starts. The answer is for you and me to go to confession next week. You're responsible for yourself. I'm responsible for me. That's the answer. And the answer is for us to have the proper relationship with the confessor who will teach us, in spite of the fact we're in the 20th century, what it means to confess your sins to God, to be absolved by your priest, and to go and sin no more. That is the answer. So the answer is not to, I don't believe, in my opinion anyway, to frontally attack on a political level all these questions of parish councils, of bishops, people who are bureaucrats or ethnarchs. Sure, you can talk, these are all problems. But the real answer is that individual Orthodox Christians, for themselves and for the sake of their children, live like Orthodox Christians. So that whatever else your bishop is putting up with, it isn't you. And it isn't me. And that's the only way it can happen. And that's why I told the story about this church outside Kiev. Because a committee couldn't do that. If a committee could do that, the IRS could get a heck of a lot of more money out of all of us. But a committee cannot put love in anybody's heart. That's why the IRS has failed to collect taxes from a lot of people. That's why all socialist government programs eventually fail, because they try to impose morality and social behavior from the top down as a program. That's why all these crazy, politically correct, multicultural diversity programs are going to fall flat on their face. You know what they're going to breed? More ethnic racism and hatred, because you're trying to force people to be good without changing their hearts. And that's why in our church, what we've got to do is we look at problems of monasticism, make your own heart like the heart of a monk, and maybe you will influence someone to actually become a monk. That's the answer. We look at disorder in the way our parish councils treat their priests or our bishops. Make your own heart humble to your priest and bishop, even when he's wrong, and other people will. And that's the lesson of opening the door and allowing the light to go out. And I honestly believe that's the difference between the Orthodox and the American way. It's the difference between personal accountability program. I think that's a good place to end. Thank you very much.